Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Good evening, everybody. Nightlight will be doing a special show tonight, and tonight's host is going to be Mark Eddy. I'm going to take second chair and run the switchboard for him. We're going to tonight be joined by author and historian Rick Osmon, who will be our guest for both hours, and documentary filmmaker LEE Pennington, who will be with the three of us for the first hour as we discuss their upcoming appearances at the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society Conference. LEE will be focusing on Kentucky's Spratt site and its mysterious stone walls and cairns. And with these two, we'll also hear about King Arthur being in America and the Brandenberg Stone, which LEE was featured analyzing on America Unearthed. So sit back, get your notebooks, your paper out, your pencils out, and learn from researchers what you weren't taught in high school. So from here on in, Mark, it's your show. Welcome to the show, and it's all yours.
Oh, no pressure there. Thanks, Paula. How are you doing tonight?
Doing well, doing very well. I'm looking forward to tonight. Both of these guys sound fascinating.
Oh, yeah, and I do want to remind everyone the Mothman Festival is this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Come on down and have Halloween in September. Let's see what. I also want to just make a quick comment about. I think you and I are developing something unique. I think it stems from our education backgrounds, and I think the listeners are really going to enjoy what we have in the works.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have such a wealth of people that you have contacts with that can come on and share their information with the general public, and lots of times they don't have a platform to talk from. So it's wonderful that you are pulling people together and providing them that platform.
No, it's becoming more of an educational forum than a shock type show. So I think the listeners are going to enjoy the next several guests we have lined up and on your show, and I think barring my house being flooded and possibly washed away next Tuesday, I think we're going to be doing a show on who was the real author of the Shakespeare plays and promoting the Shakespeare Fellowship conference in Oakland in about a month. So stay tuned for that one. So I might as well just get to LEE and Rick now. How are you
Okay.
two doing?
Oh, they're not on yet.
Oh, they aren't? Oh,
Now
okay.
they're on.
Oh, okay.
Now their mics are open. Yep.
Okay. Lee and Rick, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. I can't speak for Lee, but I'm well.
Okay.
We're both on that. We're on our way to that octogenarian thing, but Lee's a lot closer than I am.
Yeah, I'm on the precipice.
Okay.
One leg hanging over.
Well, you're not showing your age because you're out and about a lot, so that's a good sign. And
well, he's trying to keep so busy the devil can't catch him.
Yeah, well, he doesn't want me anyway. He's like the old story of the guy when he finally went to hell. They locked the doors and got a coal bucket full of coals and handed it out to the guy and said, "Go make your own hell."
You two are going to be keynote speakers at the Ancient Artifact Preservation Society conference in Harris, Michigan on October 5th, 6th, and 7th. And we, let's see, where is it being held? At the Island Resort Convention Center. So you can go in there and...
Great Native American casino there. Mm-hmm. It's an incredible facility right on native ground there, and some of our speakers are going to be Native Americans there, and that's going to be very interesting too.
Yeah, and I think Rick's going to be focusing on some of that for the second hour, and yeah, it's a nice balance of what the native people have to say about the copper mining or other topics that they're going to discuss, as well as what white boys have discovered about their research into another people's culture. So it's a nice balance of different perspectives.
Yeah, well, one of the things we haven't been doing over the years is we haven't been listening to the Native American perspective, and that's their legends, because they came from an oral tradition, is their history. And over the years, we pretended that legends aren't worth listening at, and we're finding out recently that those legends are as solid history as are many of our history books. In fact, sometimes even better history than what we put in the books.
Yes, more accurate and more, comprehensive. That would be the best word.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Rick. That I have known a great many Native American storytellers, and they are literally required to get every breath right by the elders before they're permitted to go out and tell the stories, and so there's an incredible amount of accuracy that they carry with them in that oral tradition.
Yeah, I might add that the man who did my introduction, his name is Ken Quiethawk, and he is a native storyteller.
Right.
They have some good ones.
They're more politically correct than some of our books, for sure.
Oh goodness, they're more correct. Period.
And Barbara, one of your upcoming guests, Jason Gerald, does include some of the Native American information in his book, and I think when we were kind of looking at Greg Little being a guest in October, he'll be touching on similar information. So, this is a new topic that's being rediscovered.
Some of the great work being done right now in connection with many of the Native American sites is Dr. Jim Schertz. He'll be at the conference and will be speaking. And Jim has done a great deal of survey work, especially for the Ho-Chunks. And Jim was asked, along with Richie Brown, by the late Ralph Red Cloud, to go to the Medicine Wheel out west and get the measurements on it and get the exact directions on it, because that Medicine Wheel was pointing to incredibly important sites across North America. And Ralph Red Cloud knew of many of these sites through the stories, but he had no idea where they were located in reality. And the work that Jim Schertz and Richie Brown did with the Medicine Wheel site and their follow-up, they were able to find many of those sites that had been lost physically but were still in the Native American stories. And that's those stories were accurate, and the surveys that Jim did turned out to produce incredible results all over North America, important results.
Okay,
and he keeps working on it.
Well, it's a never-ending job, and it's like a little boy said to me once. I took a bunch of little high schoolers who were back in the country and took them into the city one time and gave them some steak to eat, and it was the first time they had ever had steak. And one little boy got a bite and started chewing and chewing and chewing, and finally he looked up at me and said, "The more you chew, the bigger it gets." So that's kind of the way Jim's work is, I guess, kind of the way all of our work is. We just get going on it, and then suddenly, every time we come up with an answer, we got 12 more questions. So that's the way it should be. That's why life's exciting.
Yeah.
And
challenging.
Every day.
And since we just gave a little background on some of the guest speakers' information that they'll be discussing on folklore, Lee, you'll also be discussing the Spratt site, which it's that's an actual place. So might as well talk a little bit about how you came to find out about it, your involvement, what are your what are your conclusions of what this place is? Maybe we should start with a little description of this site. Where is it located?
Okay, the site is located in Menifee County, Kentucky, which is east of Lexington, Kentucky, and directly east of a little southeast of Louisville. Menifee County is a county that there's a major river coming off the Ohio River, the Licking River, and going up into that area, so that that area had access to the early roadways. And that's one of the things about Kentucky that stands out, that Kentucky is central to the whole, everything east of the Rockies because of the waterways. Many people don't know, but the waterways form lengthwise. Kentucky has the longest shoreline of waterways of any place, any other state in the United States except Alaska. So the rivers go all over the place in Kentucky, and Menifee County is one of those places. I first heard about this site. I was teaching a creative writing workshop up at Carter Caves, which I did for 10 summers in a row, and one day after class, this elderly man walked in and he said to me, he said, "I've got Aztec structures on my property." And, well, I got excited just thinking about the possibility of that in Kentucky, and so I said to him, well, I'd certainly like to come up and see those sometime, and so he gave me his contact stuff, his phone number and his address, and of course I got busy and forgot about it, and then suddenly one of our great writers in Kentucky, Byron Crawford, did an article on these stoneworks in the Courier Journal, and I saw it, and I said to my late wife, Joy, my goodness, that's that man that came into my class and said he had Aztec things on his property. So I got on the telephone immediately and called him and said that I would like to come up and look at him. And he said, when would you like to come? I said, as soon as possible. He said, how about today? And I said, we're on our way. And so we grabbed the camera and jumped in the car and drove up that same day. And that was the first time I witnessed those, and I was literally blown away the very first time I saw them, as anyone I ever took up there later had the same reaction that I did. At the back of the Spratt property, which is along an area called Clifton Creek, there is a canyon, a high wall canyon, horseshoe kind of canyon, and in that canyon area, down in the area, is a series of stoneworks that are just amazing. I know Barbara's worked with a lot of stones in her marvelous documentary, but I was just stunned when I saw these. Basically, in that one area, there are 23 cairns, the longest one 27 feet long, and these are obviously not new, because there are trees that would be 200 or 300 years old growing right out of the middle of some of them. So they're quite old, and they're down in this canyon. At first, one might think, well, these were stones piled up to get out of fields, but that's immediately hypothesis broken down, because that's the only place that farming would take place, is right where the cairns are. So they would be right in the middle of it, and that wouldn't make sense. They would just throw the rocks on over the hill or something if they want to try to get them out of the way. So they're obviously placed there for some reason. And then there is a long structure, serpentine kind of structure, a wall, that's broken in a couple of places by old lumbering roads, but this thing is several hundred feet long, and it comes around the hill, around the canyon, and at one point connects to what I call a float stone, that is the stone already there. I don't think it was placed there. I think the wall was placed up against the stone on purpose. I don't think the stone could have been moved. It was far too large. But if you stand off to the side of that stone, you realize that it's the head of a serpent, and the stone has a split in the front that forms the serpent's mouth. It has indentations on both sides where the serpent's eyes would be, and this wall connects into that serpent. In addition to that, there are other walls, and one can't figure out what these walls would have been. Well, people, some knowledgeable people tried to estimate how long these things might have been there. We don't know how deep they go. We know that some of them are several feet high, still in existence, but goodness, they could be covered up several feet down below. Now, when one stands in that canyon and starts looking around at all that is located there, immediately the people I've taken up there says this is a lost city, and there's not been much archaeological work done on it all. There's been no digging whatsoever done on the property. It's the only archaeological work done was a survey was taken several years ago, and the site itself was given a archaeological number and called the catch-all term we use for that period called Woodland Indian. But anyway, at this site there are a number of other things that have been found that are on the verge of being spectacular, from my opinion. One, there is a set of stone steps that have been carved that's sitting out from the wall of the canyon. It may have slid down from the canyon, I don't know, but it's about 4 or 5 very large stone step high, and it's just obviously carved stone steps, but there's nothing around it to indicate what it might have been connected to or what it might have been used for. In addition to that, there are caves, rock houses, and in one of those rock houses there is a carved serpentine head. People have referred to it variously as a serpent and as a turtle, but it's definitely a serpent head, I think. And that serpent head is pointing sort of in an easterly direction toward the 23 cairns that I mentioned earlier. And this is all just in the back of the Spratt home site. I have, over the years, over about 25 years of working on the site, have explored the area, going around that canyon and out of the canyon and toward the northwest, and all the way up to what is called Wind Hollow, and then back around on the other side in front of the Spratt house, which covers an area my guesstimate would be about a 5-mile distance. And all around that site I found evidence of there having been wall structures and cairns and petroglyphs of all sorts. There's an amazing set of petroglyphs at the canyon site, petroglyphs that some have suggested look more Mediterranean than maybe native, but nobody's been able to determine what they say. So, and but this whole area, this 5 miles, potentially has a wall that was at one time continuous and was a serpent. If that's the case, it would have been, without question, the largest serpentine structure that we know of in the world. There is a large serpentine structure in Scotland that is known. There are some known in Kentucky also that are stone. There was one up in the Boyd County area, which is north of Menifee County. That serpent had 2 heads. The head was destroyed when Ashland Oil, that owns the property several years ago, put a road through, and I think not realizing that the serpent's head was that structure at the time, and so the head was actually destroyed. But there were illustrations and pictures of it, so we do know what it looked like. But perhaps the largest serpent in the world is in the state of Kentucky. On the front side of this property, I decided to explore that one day after having worked around on the canyon side in the back of the Spratt house, and so I went up the mountain on the front side of the Spratt house, and in one day discovered 73 circular cairns, and discovered that wall that I'm talking about that ran for more than 1,500 feet without a break, and then there were breaks and then more wall running and continuing on. I think the breaks were probably old timbering roads that went through the wall and destroyed part of it, but a major part of it is still there. But I have, at this point, I just think I don't really know what it is. I know that it's major. I know that it took thousands of hours to create, and it meant a great deal to somebody to put that much effort into creating it.
Lee, since you were just talking about the serpentine wall, are the stones stacked like in the article you have in Ancient American 116, where the stones are stacked diagonally instead of... No.
And they're different kinds of stone. That's the stoneworks in Mercer County, which are fascinating also.
I just wondered if there was a pattern.
Yeah, it's the only stoneworks I've seen. Although I found a sample in Norway and I found a sample in Wales, very, very ancient, but primarily cannot find any other place, including Kentucky, where these fences were made, or these stoneworks. They may be fences. Sometimes if you have a fence, you want to keep something in or out, and many of these look like they were just done randomly, as Barbara pointed out in her documentary, that many of those walls in New England, they don't seem to follow a stone fence kind of pattern. But the amazing thing about the Mercer County fences is that they are all diagonal, and my God, were they well built. We tried to get underneath one that had been damaged to get some kind of carbon sampling, and we did that. Our sampling didn't turn out too well because of for one thing, nuclear test in New Mexico. Some of that fallout fell out in Kentucky and got under that fence and became part of the carbon test, which is kind of interesting. Yes.
How deep do the walls go? Because we found that quite often we were only seeing a very small portion of what originally had been built, and then often if you dug down, you found that there was 3 or 4 feet or more of the wall.
Yeah, we found some areas we tested went down as much as 6 feet under the ground. So, and some of them go as high as I'm going to guess 10 feet above the ground. So, that's a pretty sizable wall. But the interesting thing is these diagonal walls made of flat stones, but some of them massive, like 400 or 500 pound each. It was almost impossible to a fence that was or a wall that was already destroyed to remove any of the other stones to try to get down to the bottom of it. It was just a real difficult task, way beyond what we expected it to be. But the diagonal ones was pointed out to us by a Newfoundland engineer. That kind of wall would last longer than a stacked wall, because you would have a runoff of water and not the freezing and breaking that a flatter wall would have. So although we got a carbon dating reading of the 1950s, we know these were here in pioneer times, and we can't find out if they were there as in New England. We can't find out either if they were already there when the pioneers came in or if the pioneers built them. Certainly pioneers in Kentucky built a lot of fences, but except for the top row of stones on modern built fences, meaning historical, none of the others are diagonal. They're all flat laid stones and with a diagonal row of stones on top.
Lee, early on, you mentioned the folklore associated with the medicine wheel in the western U.S. Is there? Have you heard any about folklore from the Native Americans and living closer to the Spratt site?
No, I haven't. I've unfortunately, many of the Native Americans were run out of that part of the country, and we have a wonderful Native American population now, and there's been a lot of recovery of their stories. I would want to point out that we should not think in terms of their stories as legend, because certainly they don't. They think in terms of their stories as just that's their history. That's how they kept their records, and we've made up the legendary part of it, and so. One of the things we're looking at in Kentucky now, we have some people who've made some discoveries of Indian marker trees. And people have a tendency to think, well, those marker trees were done a couple hundred years ago, and they may have been. But, in certain places, marker trees are still being done. And, we're talking with several of the native elders now in relation to some marker trees that have been discovered in the last year or so around here. But I have only run across one story Americans that connects to stonework, and it was with the Ojibwe, and I was told that there was a group of people at one time called the Stone Stackers, and that they had, for some reason, been at odds with the tribe and were ostracized from the tribe. And they went west to the ocean and from there disappeared. And that was information I was told was contained in one of their surviving songs. I look at that very closely and try my best to put together what that's all about. But that's the only one that I've heard directly connected to stoneworks. I do know that there was there is and was a wonderful native policy when you came by somebody's burial that had played some important role in your life, and you wanted to honor that person. You always, every time you went by, you always left a stone on the pile that was already there, and so that these stone piles sometimes grew quite large because of the honoring the people who were buried in there.
Yeah, Lee, that's also a Jewish tradition.
It is.
I'm wondering about the cairns, though. Have you come to any conclusion as to what they might be? Because I've seen them in the middle of huge fields. I've seen them standing alone. They make no sense to me, and I don't want to go digging up to see if there are bones beneath them, but they appear they're stacked so intricately well that there had to be a purpose. And it's almost like, how sometimes they put the cones up for cars to drive around and stuff like that. It almost looks like it's that kind of an obstacle course of some sort.
Well, there has been some suggestion by one of our members, Sue Cotter, who suggested that in looking at the Mercer County stoneworks, that she felt they were probably guides or to sort of drive buffalo through, and that they would, have a way of slowing them down and make them go in certain directions, and so it was easier to get the buffalo if you put something in their path where they had to go around, and then you could make them go where you wanted them to go. So,
Sue has a really good reason for making that observation too. Sue and Larry own a piece of property that is right next to what is called the Buffalo Trace in Indiana. And part of that Buffalo Trace, which is 91 miles long and carried as many as 4 million buffalo every year, has a stone wall that leads right to their driveway for their cabin. And that stone wall kept the buffalo out of the field right there when there were still buffalo traveling it. And in places, it's only 3 feet tall. So it's important to note that the buffalo she's talking about were the eastern woods buffalo, which were a lot smaller than today's plains bison.
Right.
And easier to guide into the path you want. So she's got a good point there.
Well, I agree. Yeah, to answer your question.
The ones here. Yeah, it wouldn't explain the ones here in New England, though. I mean, maybe they were using it for deer.
There were bison in New England.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I never thought of that.
It certainly won't explain from my perspective the millions of miles of them. But anyway, you're talking of the cairns. I have a feeling that the cairns are individual burials.
Okay.
And I've never dug, and I won't dig in one of them, but some of them have been dug in other places, and there have been in some of them, not all of them that have been dug in, there have been skeletons found.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, unfortunately disturbed, but that doesn't that doesn't cover the walls.
No.
When I see those cairns, I think the 73 cairns that I and my late wife Joy discovered on the other side of the mountain, I think those are definitely burials. Although we had a and this I need to point out too. We had a survey done. I was trying to get the Heritage Council of Kentucky to submit the opposite side of the Spratt site from the canyon side, which is on the National Historical Record. I was trying to get the other side submitted for that too, and was told, well, the first thing we'll need to do is get a funding to have a survey done of it, and I thought, well, I know a lot of surveyors, and they're like I am, they're ready to go, so let's go out and do it and then think about it. And so I managed to get hold of the best surveyors around. It was a group in Kentucky that had resurveyed the Kentucky-Tennessee state line and reestablished everything except, I think, 3 points along the whole southern border. And anyway, they went up there, and when I told them what it was like, they just didn't believe me. And like anybody else, you tell them what's up there, and then until they get there, you can't imagine. Well, when they got there, they got very excited, and they did the best survey probably that's ever been done in the state of Kentucky with their GPS equipment and everything. They were not just surveying walls, they were surveying individual stones, and I thought only Jim Schertz did that kind of work. But anyway, it turned out that many of these stoneworks were not just random walls, but turned out to be literally effigies. Massive effigies that were far too large for you to see and understand just standing beside them. And a computer printout we had, there is an effigy of a man. It's a man running, obviously, is what it is. And above his head is what I've been calling a tuning fork. And only recently do I think I discovered what that tuning fork is. And I was looking at a topo map, and there is a creek coming into the area called Clifton Creek, and it has a branch off of it called Long Branch. And when you look at the topo map, it's identical with my tuning fork. And so I think that's probably what it's saying. Now, I don't know if the man's running to or from Clifton Creek and Long Branch, but I think there is a connection. But there were ducks and geese and turtles, effigies, So it was just amazing. And another thing that the surveyors discovered on the opposite side of the hill was there was a large stone cairn, which was a 20-foot diameter, 20-foot high stack of stones, and right beside it was a 20-foot deep, 20-foot wide hole. Now, I haven't figured that one out yet either, but it's a fascinating thing to think about.
So you have like the same dimensions on top of the Earth as going into the Earth?
Yes.
Okay, that's a little bit of a paradox, but it's also like one of those yin and yang type symbols.
As above, so below.
Right, Rick.
Yeah, well, I thought of that, as above, as below, and I guess it's connected to that, but I just can't figure the whole thing out yet. Don't expect to. But let me just mention that Rick will be talking about it in the second hour. The conference coming up is one of the great ones. Judy Johnson has been in charge of running it for many years, and this is the 14th annual one coming up, and I've been involved with them back over the years. It's one of the most amazing conferences that I get to attend, and it's based on the late Fred Reedholm's proclamation that you don't jump on the speaker because of what he's saying. You let him say what he wants to say, and you listen to it. And if you disagree with it, okay, then you give your side. Fred said, put everything out on the table, and what's not supposed to be there will eventually roll off. And so this is a wide open conference. It's you will hear all sorts of both scholarly and as some suggest off the deep end kinds of presentation, but it's amazing what it all turns out after you've had one. I always come away from that conference very excited for a long time on questions that have been answered and more questions that have been raised. And tickled to death to see Rick back there this year.
Yeah, it's been a while. But I think the first one I attended was, 2007 or so. So I haven't been there all 14 years, but I've been there a while.
Yeah, well, they've accused me of being there all 14 years, but that's not true. I've been there 13.
Lee,
I missed the first one.
Lee, what is your Ancient Kentucky Historical Association group? You're the president of that. What do you do as part of a group?
Well, according to many of the local historians, stir up trouble.
And do it very, very well, I might add.
The Ancient Kentucky Historical Association was founded 30 years ago by the late Jim Michael and a couple of other people, and their primary purpose at the time was to research the Prince-Matic information. This area in particular is just loaded with, especially in the 19th century, everybody in the area knew of Prince-Matic and knew that he was here, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what it started out, and it developed from there into something quite larger, and we just totally changed the date line of the Prince-Matic. 90% of everything you'll see on Prince-Matic says that he came here in 1170 and was the the son of King Owen in Wales, who died, and his children were fighting over the throne, which did take place, but there's no historical prince-matic connected to King Owen, and so he was then sort of created as a bastard child. Everything was correct on Prince Matic. He did come here, but he did not come here in the 12th century. He came here in the 6th century. And Jim Michael started working with two historians in Wales, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett. And Jim asked. First of all, Jim was trying to get Alan to research and translate some of the inscriptions we were finding in the state of Kentucky, inscriptions that ought not to be here. And Jim sent inscriptions to Alan, and then in a few days it would come back translated. And so, but Jim asked Alan to help him locate Matic, and Alan wasn't interested in researching that. He was going back the other direction, but it turned out that when Alan did pick up the research, he found Prince Matic was hard not to find in the 6th century and impossible to find in the 12th century historically. And we found how that became a problem, because a misunderstanding between Richard Hakluyt, the historian, and Dr. Powell, another writer. They got their information from a monk named Karadik, and we discovered that Karadik died in 1156 and would not be passing along information about 1170 unless he had a good ghostwriter. But that was how the organization began, and our research has led us into some crazy areas, some of which I bet Rick will talk about in the second hour.
Oh, well, yeah, I might. Who knows? But the other thing that, if I might jump in on the AKHA stuff, they concentrate on Kentucky sites and Kentucky prehistoric stuff, but they also look around at what was going on outside of Kentucky that affected what is in Kentucky, and that is the difference. That is the difference between quote unquote amateur organizations like AKHA and the professional organizations who are funded by an individual state and never leave their state.
Yeah, well, one of the things we have to realize, any place in the world does not take place with nothing else in the world going on. And when other things in the world happen, they affect areas ordinarily not thought to be connected at all. And that's the reason that our research encompasses more than just Kentucky. Kentucky's our focus, absolutely, and rightly so. But we realize that Gunung Padang in Indonesia played some role in Kentucky at one time or another, and we realize that Göbekli Tepe in Turkey affected what was happening in Kentucky, and so that's the reason we spread it out. And then if you don't see the broader picture, you can't see the smaller picture.
Well, that explains your interest in the Roman coins found along the Ohio River. Why are Romans coming to the Ohio Valley?
Well, you have to think in terms of Romans being anybody in the Roman Empire, and at one time that was most of Europe. And, people were using Roman coins that were nowhere near Rome. But we were finding amazing stories about incredible numbers of Roman coins being found in the Louisville area, and just anecdotally, I was able to identify perhaps up to 200 coins that were found, and many of these coins I've filmed and recorded, and they all seem to fall into a particular time period, which plays havoc with the idea that there were coins being lost by collectors. It also plays havoc with the theory because the collectors evidently just collected and lost them along riverways, waterways, the older highways.
And they were only interested in one particular century of Roman coin.
There you go. Yeah. And there was a suggestion that that there were more Roman coins found after World War II because the soldiers were bringing them back and losing them. Well, that's idiotic. They were finding more after World War II because of a little invention that had been done a little bit earlier to discover landmines, and was later used called a metal detector to find coins. Well, 1 million guys out with metal detectors are going to find more coins than all the archaeologists with a little shovel digging for the rest of their lives.
Well, yeah, you look at the large hoards of coins that are found, say, in England, and in particular the Roman hoard coins, 50,000 in a shot.
Right.
But even there, the hoard of 50,000 coins spanned the dates on the coins spanned a period of almost 3 centuries.
Right.
So. Right.
Well, they were being used in England, certainly a wide spread of time. Even though my feeling was they weren't part of the Roman Empire, they were using the coinage.
Well, yeah, certainly. And here we find coins not only from the Roman Empire, but also from the Byzantine Empire and Carthagena and a few other places. Just a couple of Phoenician coins have turned up, but they're ignored because, well, they got to be fake.
Okay, Lee, a couple years ago when you were at AAPS, you presented your Seafaring Strangers documentary. Are you going to be doing that, something like that this year, or?
No, I won't be presenting a documentary. My talk at the conference this year on the Kentucky Spratt site as Kentucky's Lost City will be a PowerPoint presentation. But over the years, I have presented documentaries. They're primarily, the result of a great deal of research that I do, and then put the documentary together. And I probably have to live another 50 years in order to get it all done.
Okay. Well,
I vote yes. I vote yes. Yes. Live another 50 years.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a good conference.
Yeah, it'll be marvelous. We're taking a good group here from Kentucky area. We'll have about 13 or 14 people going up in one vehicle, and that should be a lot of fun.
I don't think there will be blood.
You don't think what?
I don't think there will be blood.
No, there won't be any blood.
No, I think we'll have a great
time.
I threatened to bring a guitar, but that's subject to change.
Well, that's a good threat, and we're working to make sure there's room for it.
Okay, Lee, are you going to bring your guitar in case you have to be a wedding singer again?
No, I won't bring my guitar. I can't because I don't own a guitar anymore. I had a wonderful guitar I used over the year, a 1931 Gibson, and I had promised it in my will to my nephew, but I turned out I'm living too long, and instead of making him wait until I pass along, I thought I ought to just pass the guitar along to him, wonderful nephew I've got, and I did that, and so Joe Kendall's now the owner of the 1931 Gibson, so I don't own a guitar now. I have to play Jill's.
Okay.
Well, you're welcome to use mine at any time.
Thank you.
Okay, so Lee, which one did you play at Rick and Brenda's wedding?
I played Rick's guitar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that messed me up good because I had managed to stay hid from all that folk music for quite a while, and Rick and Brenda, bless their hearts, they said, "Would you play at our wedding?" And loved both of them and could not say no. And unfortunately, they took pictures and spread them around, and then people started saying, "You mean you play a guitar?" And there you go. Life's good.
Hidden talents.
Yeah, he has many talents, and playing guitar is one of them, but singing is another. He does some amazing folk music. We've been to a couple of folk festivals together, in fact. I hope to do more of that with Lee.
Yeah, I hope so, especially that wonderful thing we did at White Oaks, Indiana on, the Make-A-Wish for Children Foundation. And we raised a lot of money for them at that concert, and an awful lot of musicians want to get back to that and do it again, and I'm all for that.
Lee, I have a question. with the getting back to the Pratt property, I have found that being around these stone structures and these stone walls and there is a feeling about them that is very magical. Has it inspired any poetry for you at all?
Well, everything that I touch inspires me for poetry. I'm pretty reckless with my poetry, so I'd have to say yes on that. But one of the things I will say that there is something about these ancient sites. I think Joy would kill me if I said this while she were alive, but I think I'll go ahead and say it. Joy had the ability to recognize an odor that was at these ancient sites that was around no other site. And we were up in Newfoundland and out in the middle of the woods, and Joy reached over and touched my arm and said, "We're standing in the middle of something important." And we actually started looking around and found stoneworks and all sorts of things. And but I've had the hair raise up on my arms in some of these places, including the Spratt site. And I don't know what to say about that, except that maybe the ancients want us to know, and their spirits are somehow still around trying to tell us to pay attention.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that, because I know that with some of the structures and some of the walls that we went to, it was almost as though time was standing still. It was almost as though there was something very special there that if you listened carefully enough, you'd be able to catch it. And for want of a better word, I'm going to call it magic, because some of the sites do have that kind of an energy about them that almost reminds me of the energy inside of a crop circle, or the energy that is around a place that has had ceremony of some sort performed in it for generations. There is definitely a magic about some of these sites.
Oh, some kind of residue.
Well,
yeah.
That's a good concept, I think. I will just mention one thing. In 1997, I went to Easter Island to do some filming, and after I was there about a week or so, and told Joy, I said, I've got to come back because I didn't have a chance to go among the Moai and listen to what they wanted to say. And so at the millennium break, we went back to Easter Island, and I literally got to live with the Moai day and night, and felt voices, even though I couldn't understand everything I was hearing, but felt voices enough to be able to do a documentary on Easter Island.
Wow, that must have been a great trip.
Well, I never had a bad trip in my life, Mark. But yeah, Easter Island is an incredible trip. Incredible two trips. But the last one at the millennium break, especially when Y2K was supposed to happen, and I did film the last airplane leaving Easter Island. I was going to have it on record. If all the planes went down, I'd at least have the last one leaving Easter Island.
I had a friend who had, her father was on one of the ships that was one of the early contacts, and he had brought home one of a small head, and they have an amazing energy on them. And the head that she had, it was, I guess it was about maybe 2.5, 3 feet high. It had an ankh on the back of it. Did any of the other heads have ankhs on the back of them?
They have all sorts of petroglyphs on them, yes.
Wow. It was fascinating to touch something like that.
I don't specifically remember one with a knock, but I won't. I wouldn't be surprised.
That's something that isn't really made public too much. That there were symbols on the backs of them. They usually just go to the eyes and where they're facing and all of that stuff. But I did often wonder if there were other markings on them that weren't being publicized.
Yeah, they don't publicize that. There's one that Heyerdahl dug out that had a 3-masted ship on it on the front of the Moai.
Oh, wow.
And
the Spanish raided Easter Island for slaves and slave labor for 230 years, something like that.
Well, they cleared them all out in that one fell swoop, taking them to the guano mines in South America, and there were the Bishop of Tahiti raised Cain, and they let him come back, but of the 1,000 people they took off of Easter Island, only 100 returned. All the rest of them died. and the 100 they brought back had smallpox, and they wiped out the rest of the people. It was fewer than 30 Rapa Nui people survived, original Rapa Nui people, and their stories, their ability to read the Rongo boards. They took the elders, everything into the slaves, and they destroyed a whole people and a whole information. But we had thousands of history books in the Americas that were destroyed, and we have a few of those belts left that have the information on it, but we burned tons of those. We'd have had a whole history of the people if we'd have been good guys.
I think really when you look at it all, that we were the barbarians and they were the cultured society.
Oh, absolutely, but. What do you say?
They had a writing system. When I say they, it's Native Americans. Pick a tribe, any tribe. They at least had a connection to someone who had a writing system, and they still do. They just didn't want us to know about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Yeah, we have our Native American, one of our Native American advisors in the ancient Kentucky, Lauren Jeffries, has done some marvelous work on what I think is a very unique piece of history that anything new that turns up now is suggested to be a hoax or a fraud, but I think he's working with some authentic stuff. You know what I'm talking about, Rick? Probably.
Oh, I think I do. And there are many examples on both continents. But
yes,
the idea that writing was something that Native Americans could not do because they were not cognitively capable, that's the lie that all the governments tried to tell.
Yeah, well, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
That's like saying that Cherokee alphabet was invented overnight.
Well, yeah, and they still stick to that lie.
Yeah. As the guy said, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, the Cherokee did invent the blues, but that's a whole different story. So, my thanks to that, by the way.
Well, Rick, I've been taking up some of your hour, buddy, and I want to close out here and thank Barbara and thank Mark and thank you, Rick, for being part of this tonight. And then I want to get loose and let you talk up a storm.
Okay.
I've had 0 Mountain Dew tonight.
Well, Lee, if it's getting late for you, we really appreciate the hour and 15 minutes or so you spent with us, and we'll have to do it again. We'll get the archive to you tomorrow. It was very insightful, and we want to wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, and then I'm happy anytime Mark and Barbara to come back and talk again. If there's something
sure.
we missed that you want to cover, be delighted.
Oh, we'll hold you to that.
Oh, you don't have to hold me. I'll lean up against you on that.
We need to talk about your creative inspirations and being a poet laureate and all the writing awards that have come your way. So that's something that hopefully can inspire the listeners to get motivated to write their stories and poems.
Well, it's been a great trip, a great ride, and I'm still pumping. So.
Okay, we could save that for next time. So, we want to wish you good luck on your trip to Michigan next month, and it's October 5th, 6th, and 7th at the the Island Resort and Convention Center in Harris, Michigan. Got to see like 15 great speakers talk about prehistoric America. So Lee will be there.
Well, listen, I'll say good night to everybody, and again, thank you so much for having me, and to all those people that I sent out links to and you've been listening, thanks for listening, and for those of you who missed it, you're going to have to hear it anyway because they're going to be sending me a link, and so if you didn't hear it, you will in the future.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much, Lee, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night.
See you soon. So, Mark Eddy, where do you want to go from here? It's your show. Call the shot.
Let's see. Okay. We could start off with, is it really true that you're a possum rescuer, Sports Illustrated model, and my husband-in-law? I don't know. I got this email with stuff like that. Barbara, do you know who could have sent that to me?
I have no idea.
During the maybe commercial break, we can trace that message. But
the possum rescuer, yes, I did that just the other day. And the thing that Lee mentioned about the White Oak Music Festival, I rescued a black snake from inside a stove at one of the cabins there. I got bitten. Kind. Reminded me of an old song about a serpent that came from the road. Anyway, the rest of it, I don't know. Purely conjecture at this point.
Okay, I don't know who could have been sending us messages like that, but we'll check into that. Hopefully she's not sitting next to you in the garage, but we'll move on to some other topics. Then, Rick, when you've been putting together a lot of articles, covering all the engineering work done from the archaic people to the Mississippians in the Ohio Valley, Kentucky, Tennessee areas. Really informative discussions, and you have all kinds of like the Google Earth and the maps that clearly document where all these activities were happening around bends in the rivers, and where do you get ideas for these kind of articles?
Inspiration. Ask me about inspiration. Sometimes, like Barbara, I get that feeling that I'm someplace important. But most of the time, I'm sitting in front of the computer looking at a map. As you mentioned, Google. I'm lucky enough, fortunate enough, profoundly fortunate to be associated with a guy by the name of Calvin Hamilton, who has compiled a really good library of LiDAR maps. Unfortunately, he got hacked and no longer have the same easy access. But the LiDAR has been a tool I've used extensively in this series of articles I'm writing for Ancient America. And now I'm kind of moving into other technological marvels, I guess, would be one of the ways of putting it. A magnetometry setup. I've become at least peripherally involved with an organization that uses magnetometry to look for signs of ancient occupation. So it's an additional important tool, I guess, in looking for these things. But the main source, the most important source of information for me to go looking for stuff is other people. They give me an idea of, for instance, I'll give you a for instance. We mentioned Larry and Sue Cutter earlier about her idea of the rock walls. Well, one of their friends mentioned to them that there was also a fortress near them. Well, that's the main thing I write about is the fortresses and where they were, and why they were where they are or were. So the day I was over there, it was right after having presented to the AKHA, and I was also going to present to Clark Grant Historical Association that evening. Anyway, that day we went out looking for this site because their friend had to work that day. So we were going to try to go on directions he had sent with Sue. So he said, take a right here and then look to your right. And, well, looking to my right, I found a big bend in the Blue River, and it was along a road called Fort Hill Road. And where we were at that exact moment was right in front of a church called Fort Hill Church. And, the place name thing just never lies. It almost never gives you a false positive. So it's a pretty good bet that there was a fortress there. I'd got to do some actual boots on the ground legwork to determine it for sure. But the bend in the river, all the map, the topography, everything is right. So I expect JD's correct. That's where it was. So I've had a number of sites like that have been brought to me by readers or listeners to go investigate based on the information I've given out. It's going to be close to a navigable waterway. It's going to be along a geographic line between basically Louisville, Kentucky, and Merrim, Indiana, in this case. So that's on the Ohio River, and the latter one's on the Wabash River. Another guy had gotten a hold of me about a mound that he'd found, or a site that he had found in Greene County, Indiana, and it was on a different line that also intersected at Merrim, Indiana. So my listeners and readers have helped me tremendously because they're looking, they're watching, they're listening and learning, and they're associating these things. So I'm getting some good stuff here. I also get some bad stuff. Mostly I'm getting some good stuff. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. And, where they bring up the importance of place names, and you look at it on Google Earth, I can see why it has, this certain name. It's all relevant. There's a reason why there's a modern name based on probably some kind of historical event that happens in the early 18th century or something like that. You're making good points. I understand. And,
in that case, it probably described a place that was left over, the remnants, ruins of a fortress.
Mm-hmm.
And even with the fortress gone, the place name survived. Like I was driving from home, to basically northwestern Illinois, over to Nauvoo, Illinois, to help Wayne May do some archaeological survey with a site he has over there. And I passed through a place called Signal Hill, Illinois. I'm sorry, through Tower Hill, Illinois. And I'm on the cell phone in the truck, calling Brenda and asking her to look this up on Google for me while I'm driving. She finds the history, and it's because Native Americans allegedly used this place as a signal point on the plains, the Great Plains. You don't think of Illinois being part of the Great Plains, but it still is. And they had a signal tower there in early historic period. So those place names don't lie. Use that information to look for more sites, and then let me know what you find.
Okay.
And that is part of the whole theme of this upcoming AAPS. This year's theme is The Earth Speaks. Hey, I'm listening.
Okay, and
Judy,
I did want to just make a quick plug for the website. AAPScopper.org is the website to go and check it out, and you see the list of excellent speakers that Judy has assembled for this year's conference.
Well, I think also you got to get a plug in here for what is probably one of my favorite books of all time, and that's Rick's Graves of the Golden Bear. And
that's high praise.
That book I have given to so many people. It is definitely a must-read for anybody who has any wish for knowing about the history of this country. I can't tell you how many times I have misquoted it, but it's a great book.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that.
Well, every time I've had you on the show, I've read it again, and I always find something new.
Well, this year at AAPS, I'm going to be presenting a slightly different version of a presentation I call The Seer and the Oracle. Both, let's say, legendary characters in ancient history, seers and oracles. And they had these magical abilities, of course, to either see what the gods were sending them or to speak to the gods for us mortals. Sometimes the same person would do both, but it seems unlikely to me. However, there may have been a little bit of Arthur C. Clarke involved in that, because any sufficiently advanced technology will appear as magic to the uninitiated.
Yep.
And that's what I think was happening throughout early Roman history, throughout early Greek history, throughout early American prehistory, going back to at least the Olmecs, maybe further. And I think I can prove it. So that's what I'm talking about this year. And it's an opening speech for the entire conference. So it's, the Earth Speaks, I'm listening.
I got a question. I know in some conferences, you're able to get CDs of the different presentations. Is that something that happens with this particular conference?
I am not certain whether they'll get that to happen this time or not. We've had efforts, and I even tried to do it myself once, and still it ended up being a mess. I wish I had a good answer for you on that one, Barbara, but I do not.
Because there are some people that can't afford to get to these conferences, and yet they would really be hungry for the information that is being shared, and it would be such a pity to not have that particular. Actually, if you even want to talk to the conference people, it's a great way to get extra money for, burning CDs for the presentations.
Yep, I'm open to it. I just don't know whether it will happen this time. So, maybe we can find out. Maybe Judy's listening, but I'm not sure.
Or maybe we could maybe we could get you after the conference if that isn't a possibility. Maybe we could get you to come on the show and give the presentation, obviously just verbally, but give the talk on the radio show.
Back when I was doing Blog Talk Radio myself, I devised a system of describing my presentation and having the slideshow available on a different website that people could follow along.
Oh, wow.
Maybe we can set up something like that.
We'll talk.
Okay, we'll talk.
Rick, maybe I'll just resurrect the Oopa Loopa Cafe.
Oh, maybe I should. Maybe I will, but it won't be really soon. It won't be next few months.
Okay. So, there are going to be other really good speakers like Rich Moats there. Lon Krieger is scheduled. Maybe next week he might be able to stop in for a little bit after the Shakespeare people. I am waiting to have a discussion with him, but he does have some neat information about the Michigan ancient Michigan gardens and where they're growing sizable crops to feed the copper miners. It's an interesting theory, but he's going to be there. Do you know what Rich is going to be speaking about?
I hate to say, I thought I did, but now I'm not certain.
He was involved in that survey of Perry County with the
magnetometry. Yes.
The ground penetrating radar is.
Yes.
I don't know if that's going to be his topic or not, but I know that
I'm not certain either. But they have an actual organization put together. I don't know where it stands, either from a legal standpoint or from a funding standpoint. And I'll leave that to Rich because he's the guy. But what they're doing, looking for evidence of occupancy to find two things. And these are very important things. They're looking to find what the population was and how the population moved. So, yes, they had permanent towns, but yes, they still moved around. People still moved around, just like today. I got some friends who are getting ready to move now. They moved. People moved. People get bored with where they are and they move on. How much of that happened 2,000 years ago? We don't know yet. But we're working on a way to find out. Rich is working on a way to find out. Another guy that you haven't mentioned, whose work is extremely important for diffusion theory, and that is Carl Johannesson. And his work has documented, last time I counted, something over 400 different species of plants and animals that have arrived someplace in the world from here or to here, and they couldn't have done it naturally. They had to have done it by being transplanted or transported by humans. And in several cases, that could not have happened with a Beringia entry. So his work is amazing, amazingly important, I might add. Of course, Wayne May is going to be there, and Jim Schurz.
Jay Wakefield, I'm sure, is probably be talking about some transatlantic crossings.
Yeah, related to copper trade, I believe. Jay's done some amazingly important work in that arena. This conference has come up over the years, has come up with some amazing, truly fascinating theories with some pretty good logic backing them up, but things that would just knock your socks off as it turned out to be, proven. Just haven't been able to prove some of them. Jay's on the verge of some proof, so there we go.
Okay.
Anyway.
And do you think with this group of lecturers that the Powell Doctrine will be corrected?
Within this group, yes. Outside, it's hard to say, but we're going to continue working at that. For those listeners who don't know, the Powell Doctrine is that if you find anything that shows writing, some form of sophistication well beyond what Powell described as barbarians, and he used that term for all Native Americans. If you find those things that prove him wrong, you must destroy them. That's a Powell Doctrine. That's paraphrased, but that's what it amounted to. It was just chicken scratches. It didn't really mean anything. Then before the end of his life in 1902, he started making exceptions for, the Maya might have known how to write. Oh, the Aztec, yeah, they had a couple little books. They had enough to warm a basilica for 100 years? Yeah. That's the Powell Doctrine.
Rick, where do you think the research that is coming out now is taking the alternative historians movement? Where are we going with breaking away from the mainstream dogma?
Okay, the dogma for the last, let's go with about 78 years, has declared that there was nobody here before Clovis. You've heard this.
Mm-hmm.
That dogma is falling apart so rapidly they can't even sweep it under the rug. The current research is finding much more evidence that people were impressively mobile on the waterways and the oceans, and impressively restricted mobility on the land because, walking just doesn't get you there nearly as fast as sailing does. And that's not just us diffusionists who are pushing this concept. It is now entering mainstream anthropology and archaeology. And I think that is a great thing. You have more and more universities who are opening departments to include curricula surrounding underwater archaeology, marine and archaeology together in the same room. Oceanography and archaeology in the same room. These are very important strides in academia. Whether it will take in my lifetime remains to be seen. But the research is going there. 100 years ago, people were still taking their shovels and their buckboards out and digging into mounds looking for artifacts. That was archaeology. Today, archaeology does not necessarily involve a shovel at all. It might include a test vial and go out and get a little bit of soil and come back and analyze everything that's in a little test vial and find out what was growing there at that point in time, or what the point in time was in this particular sample. What was growing? Was it being cultivated or was it wild? And nowadays they're developing better techniques to determine that question. And the magnetometry and the ground penetrating radar and the LIDAR all play a part. But when you get down to it, if you can't dig a hole, you can't know much. And right now we can't dig a hole. If we suspect there's a burial within 30, 40 feet of where we want to dig a hole, we can't dig that hole without permission from somebody way up the ladder in state government, or maybe even federal government.
So, well, won't that kind of destroy evidence? In order to preserve whatever is there, it takes a little more than a shovel.
Yes, it does. To truly determine, you have to remove everything. I'll give you a couple of examples of where that is still going on, because there are no even speculated burials. That's the important difference. You've got a guy in South Carolina that says he can go back 18,500 years before Columbus. That kind of rules out Clovis. And it coincides with Solutrean in France. And, well, some of these points are pretty close, comparable for sure, to the ones in Europe, southwestern Europe at that time. You've got sites in Chile that have been determined by geologists, not archaeologists, to be 200,000 years old. People making tools at that time. Something making tools at that time. Didn't find any human remains. You've got places like we mentioned earlier, Göbekli Tepe, and a lot of these sites that are 10,000, 12,000 years old. You've got a site in Crete, on the island of Crete, where archaeologists found tools made by presumably something hominin, and those tools are 120,000 years old. Wait a minute, Crete is an island that you can't walk to now, and you couldn't walk to it then. That means that 120,000 years ago, somebody sailed to Crete. Whether it was inadvertent is kind of immaterial. They were on something that floated. The Philippines populated 75,000 years ago with modern humans, and as much as 700,000 years ago with proto-hominids. You get so many of these examples around the world that people sailed and they made tools in such deep antiquity that it's embarrassing to read what some of the anthropologists say about them. If you know what I'm getting at.
Oh, absolutely. And for a long time they were called out of place artifacts, OPARTs or whatever. Yes. OPARTs, or kind of like, oops, how did this happen? But
yeah,
the more you're finding, the more that they're going to have to accept the fact that their time frame is off.
It isn't their time frame that's off. It's their whole thinking process. They keep thinking that we are the most intelligent thing to ever be on Earth, and they're wrong.
Yes.
They're just wrong.
Well, I think what really bugs me is that not only was there the technology to do amazing things, but I think in many ways we don't do them justice as far as their consciousness and their evolution of their consciousness goes, because they had a better balance and harmony with nature than we do at this moment in time.
Yeah, I think we can presume that. I can't prove it, but I do presume it. I also can't prove that can't yet prove that they were able to communicate over very long distances without wires. But I'm pretty sure they did. And that's the root of my research. It's a technological capability that is low tech, but very high in cognitive function. Very high in cognitive function. Probably higher than almost any anthropologist living today, I might add.
Well,
but
yeah,
I can pretty much prove. I'm sorry?
No, I of course they did. I mean, they weren't bogged down with the distractions that we have today, and so many of those cultures had a group consciousness that gave their history from the beginning of time. So the mind at that time, I think, was sharper and more attuned and more connected than we are today.
Well, at least somebody in their society was. It may not have extended to every individual, and it doesn't today either, for that matter. I mean, take a group of 100 people. How many can write an app for a phone? Chances are pretty low that any of them will. But ask me how many of them can use a phone, and the chances are pretty high that all of them can use a phone. Sending the message doesn't mean actually conveying the message yourself.
Okay.
But at that point in time, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know that. What I can, however, is I can discern pretty much how it was done, and my analysis of that is it could be done a half a dozen different ways. I can tell you exactly how the Romans were doing it 2,140 years ago. I mean, keystrokes.
Hey, we're kind of losing your connection. Are you drifting from the phone?
I didn't think so, but anything's
That's
possible.
better.
Is that bad?
That's better now.
Okay. Yeah, my headphone slipped down. Sorry. I know precisely, keystroke for keystroke, how Polybius sent messages by line of sight in 146 BC. Or I should say Scipio Africanus sent the messages, and Polybius wrote down what they did and how they did it. So keystroke for keystroke, I know exactly how they did it. I don't have that same advantage of an accurate, detailed history for, let's say, the Maya of 1,000 years ago. But what I can discern is that they had these observatories that didn't necessarily look at the heavens, because those windows weren't high up. They were kind of looking at the horizon everywhere. And every 10 miles on a 10 by 10 grid, the Yucatan is covered with these types of, I'll call them public works, because I'm pretty sure that's what they were.
Wow.
And I believe they were all talking to each other. So that's what I think those observatories were used for. The actual bit by bit, keystroke by keystroke, I don't have that yet. I'm still working on that one. Their numbering system was different. Their writing system wasn't even alphabetic. It was syllabic. Harder for me to discern how to put those things together using the same technology, or same basic technology that the Romans were using, let's say contemporaneously. But which one came up with it first? I don't care who came up with it first. They were all using it.
Well, and didn't you find signal fires or places where signal fires could have been lit or whatever along the terrain around you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it was the network, and that's all we can, that's the only word that truly describes it. It was a communications network that used line of sight. Oh, wait, so do cell phones. All cell phones work on a line of sight communication system. They just do it with electronics instead of a light. But if you can find a cell tower, then you're probably pretty close to one of the original signal hills or signal mounds or signal something, because the terrain hasn't changed that much in 2,000 years.
No, that's true. Wow.
That's the other thing. Yeah, that's the other thing about Larry and Sue's friend. As we were driving out there looking for his site, we went right past the cell tower, and I said, "We're close. We're close."
So,
and I found that on some things have not changed. The approach, the actual detailed technologies can change. The terrain will not. The use of the terrain will not. So, and the end goal will not. The end goal is to communicate. Sometimes for political reasons, sometimes for mercantile reasons, sometimes for, hey, your Uncle Joe died today. You know, you got to send that message too now and then. So the individuals had to have had access, at least for those things. Whether the state did or not is pretty obvious that, well, the state built infrastructure for it.
Well,
as we do now.
There's just so much that we have ignored or not even questioned, that it's fabulous that you're going through all of the meticulous work of trying to figure it all out.
Well, it's fabulous that people agree with me and send me new ideas now. So that makes it a lot easier for me.
I would think.
Yeah, and one of the ideas that really stuck out with me that we made was, we talk a lot about, like the land bridge to Alaska, and Kennewick Man was found along the coast of Washington, and then you get America's Stonehenge on the East Coast, and the submerged Wendover burials in Florida. But you really don't think a lot about such an advanced prehistoric culture in the central part of the United States, like Kentucky and southern Indiana. But that's where a lot of these artifacts and remains can still be seen, or they're at least well documented.
They are pretty well documented, and that's thanks to the early settlers, because you had a few folks, Rathanask, Arthur St. Clair. Most people don't know Arthur St. Clair, the first governor of the Northwest, only governor of Northwest Territory, first governor of Ohio Territory. He did not get elected as state governor. He documented a lot of the things, at least around where he built the capital for the Ohio Territory, which was on top of a mound initially, by the way. But right across the river it's now called Hamar's Hill, and it was already a signal hill, and he knew that. The early guys, from Jefferson on back, actually from, let's see, where would I go with that earliest? Probably when the Dutch first got into New York. Those were the first people who knew that the natives were talking about them. Okay, think about that. When John Smith traveled up the Susquehanna, the natives knew he was coming. When Columbus arrived at Santiago, the natives knew he was coming. When he arrived in Cuba, the natives knew he was coming and that he was looking for gold. How did he convey that to them? More to the point, one of them knew where to take him to find gold on a different island 150 miles away. These questions become hard to answer.
Yeah.
It was basically prehistoric cell phones.
Yeah, basically. But to make one that for the native, the kidnapped native, I might add, to have knowledge of a source of gold in a creek on an island 150 miles away is just phenomenal, and yet sailed right to it. According to Columbus's own log. Anyway, 4 minutes to 12. What do you want to talk about now?
Okay.
You've got 3 minutes to go.
Yeah. If people have want to look more into the AAPS conference, they can go to aapscopper.org. Check out all the information, location, the amazing list of speakers. Do you want to add anything else to that? Plug your
when
book.
You book a room, you get I think it's a $20 gambling certificate, so you can go play the resort for free, kind of thing. It's an amazing list of speakers. It's an amazing event, and I haven't been to the Harris venue. We used to go up into Marquette, so I haven't been to this new venue yet. I'm kind of anxious for that one.
Okay.
Let's see, what else?
Is there samples of copper going to be brought to the conference? Are other people going to bring artifacts to identify or show?
That has certainly happened in the past. Wayne usually has a few small samples of copper and artifacts. I don't know if Jim will bring anything down from the Tourist Trap. That's the name of his rock shop, by the way, Tourist Trap. But he has an amazing array of geological samples, not just copper, that comes from Michigan. So hopefully he'll have some of those.
Okay, and
it's a great place.
Are you going to have copies of the Graves of the Golden Bear?
I will. I will also have some reprints of Ancient American and a compilation of my first, I think it's 5 or 6 articles from Ancient American. I'm still working on the new updated version, which will have 17. It won't be available for this gig, though.
Okay, and where can people get a copy of the Graves of the Golden Bear?
It is available from Amazon as Kindle or print. It's also available from Barnes & Noble as Nook or print. You have to order it. They don't keep them in stock at the stores. But you can order it online. It's at Books A Million if you order it. It's also as a Diesel and a Sony reader and a whole bunch of other places. It's available all over the place. You can order a print copy through Ancient American Magazine, although I think they're out of stock right now. So Amazon remains the most reliable method.
Yeah, and we guys are out of time. Time to say goodnight, Mark.
It's been fun and it's been fast.
Yes.
Thank you, Rick, for being a great guest. Thank you, Barbara, for the great opportunity. And we'll be back next week with 2 Shakespeare scholars, and hopefully another AAPS speaker. So we'll see you all next week.
Good night, everybody.
And don't forget the Mothman Festival this weekend.
Okie doke. Good night.
Good night.
Bye. See you next week.